Welcome to the Gravel Paddock, the podcast that takes you directly inside a professional gravel peloton. I'm your host, Antonin Livassé, Sports Marketing Manager. Here, we bypass the fluff and talk about what actually matters: raw race tactics, pro tech setup, and the unfiltered business of modern racing. From the UCI World on Gravel Earth Series to the American Monuments of the Lifetime Grand Prix, the race starts here. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome to the episode 7 of the Gravel Paddock. Today we are looking at the evolution of gravel performance. My guest spent 10 years in the World Tour before successfully making the jump to become one of Europe's first elite gravel racers. Winner of the Rift and now director at Team EF Coaching in Girona. Welcome to the pod, Nathan Haas.
Hey, thank you for having me. Nice intro. Thank you.
So you were one of the first European road pros to fully transition to elite gravel. Looking back, what was the hardest part of that initial leap?
Yeah, I think I was actually the first from the World Tour here in Europe. I was inspired by some of my old teammates, Ted King, Alex Howes, Lachlan Morton, who had a really nice transition out of professional cycling into gravel. Because at a certain point, you get a little bit tired from the pressure and the seriousness of it, and maybe you lose your love for racing. And for me, gravel was just a very logical thing to jump across to. And it's definitely safe to say that gravel is not World Tour racing. It's not the best riders in the world. They're very good riders, but it's not the best riders in the world. In some ways, that you can come back to a level of racing where you can be very competitive. And that for me was just something that I was missing. In my last 2 years at Cofidis, I just couldn't get my level like I had in the years before. It was also a strange time in cycling where all of a sudden, it just became about power, less about tactics. And also the road captain became quite irrelevant. The 20-year-old teammate was basically running the meeting, saying how he wanted to race, as opposed to the road captains being somewhat important in a team. That just sort of disappeared. And for me, that just wasn't satisfying. Whereas gravel, for me, was something that was really attractive. I've been living in Girona, and since 2014, I had a cyclocross bike, and I was riding what we now call gravel. But for me, I just called it, riding in the mountains. And so, I knew all the trails, and, I came before road. I was actually, in the World Cup mountain bike circuit. So for me, off-road was always my place. And it just turned out that my road career went better than my mountain bike career. So for me, it was a bit of a full circle to go back off-road. And yeah, it was a beautiful time. And it was right at the point where the sport was beginning to actually become something kind of serious. And it was nice to try to be part of a group of riders that were trying to keep the sport of a good spirit. Hopefully leave a legacy for the time that I would retire, which is now.
And talking about Girona, so you knew Girona maybe when it was just a quiet hub for roadies, and today is the gravel's capital of the world, outside of this week where we switched to Emporia, Kansas for Unbound. But what has changed out there, and could you feel something different from the days?
Once you're off-road, you don't see any difference. It's all the same. It's just the same trails. And I think that's what draws people to the gravel in Girona, is that it's 360 degrees. You can ride in any direction on gravel, whereas road it's sort of like 2D in a way. You've got very set roads. And what's kind of cool now, though, is that a lot of people are riding road bikes with really big tires, like 32 mil, so that they can actually do some road, but then use a gravel road to connect and create new loops. So there's always a crossover. Mountain biking and road crossed over and made gravel. And now, to a certain extent, road bikes are also starting to beef up, so they're more capable. And I think what's cool with cycling is that it's always evolving, and there's these sort of new niche disciplines that come through. And gravel's exploded. I definitely hope it's not a bubble. It could be a bubble, but for now, I think it's something like 2.5 or 3 bikes out of 5 in the market of bikes sold that aren't e-bikes are gravel bikes. So there's a lot of hunger for it at the moment, and I think it's born mostly from people not wanting to be on roads next to cars. I think road networks worldwide are getting busier, and people like to take away that stress and anxiety from the danger of cars. But people do forget sometimes that there are still cars on gravel roads, and you can't ride them like there's no one on them. But for the most part, if you ride smart, you can have a lot of fun without stressing.
Yeah, it's more versatile, and the road bar or MTB, you can go basically anywhere, and it's really benefits of gravel bikes. How you see this evolving in the future in two different directions, one for the recreational rider and one for the true racer?
Yeah, I mean, it's the evolution of gravel bikes, even in the last 4 years, has been mind blowing. And now we're also looking at 32-inch wheels, which which I think is definitely going to change the game. Tire widths have changed a lot. Internal rim widths have changed a lot. Not necessarily for good, but it's out there for the market. But there's definitely two speeds in how people like to ride gravel bikes. My gravel bike now that I ride most of the time has a suspension fork and 180 mil rotors, 50 mil tires. It's because I like to go really fast down hills and take on trails that a gravel bike is sort of on the edge of being able to do. For me, it's like extreme gravel riding. I really enjoy this. Other people just want to be able to go at party pace, just chilling on fire roads and have a good time. So does their bike need to be different? Or if they're doing some of these long adventure races, yeah, you need to have the capacity to have more water bottles. You need more storage. So, there's room for bikes to integrate. Like I know brands like, Guava here in Girona, they have their fast race bike, but they also have a bike with storage, as does Specialized, as does Canyon. But some brands like Colnago are just race bred. So I think it comes down a little bit to like the DNA of the brands. If it is really a pure red race bike like Colnago, I don't see them making, a storage unit for the bike or extra bidon cages or anything to put a pannier rack on. But, as the sport does sort of, move forward, it's diverging from where it began. It's not converging to one bike. But I see that as a good thing because, people should enjoy the bike however they would like to enjoy the bike. And I think that's really the crux of the situation with cycling. And, a lot of people first came out with some criticism of gravel bikes, like, oh, it's just a road bike with it. And it's like, who cares? Who cares how people want to ride their bike? If they're happy, that's what they should be doing. And you're going to find the bike that suits you. And if you like racing and speed is really important to you, you're probably going to go for something a little bit lighter and more aero. But if not, for people that take their bikes all around the world to say like Mongolia to do a bike packing trip, bring back an alloy bike or a steel bike because you can literally drop it on a rock and you can still ride it. Whereas carbon, it's game over. And what do you do in the middle of Mongolia? Yeah, the evolution is definitely that it's diverging from its route when it first began. But I see it's a great thing.
Now let's enter a bit into the training part and the paradigm shift. Maybe how do you train? How do you see the training of a gravel athlete today compared to a classic road cyclist? Because the racing part is really different. It's more one day race focus on the gravel side. You need to be able to sustain high power for maybe longer time. And at the same time being explosive because you still need to climb on some MTB style parts. So how do you see this and how do you differentiate between gravel athletes and road cyclists?
Well, first of all, there's very different distances. There are people who are specialists at, the UCI shorter distance racing. And then there's those who just have more of a natural capacity for the longer races. So taking that out of account, because that's already a huge difference, I would disagree by saying that, gravel riders hold more power for a longer period of time. Absolutely not. Like the World Tour riders can hold far more power for a far longer period of time than any gravel racer. But there is a fundamental difference now in gravel racing. And I would say it's ever since the mountain bikers came to gravel. Gravel used to ride a little bit into the race, like a road race. It would be a hard start, but you'd be quite happy with a small selection of 20, 30 riders. And then you kind of let the race play out. Everyone gets a bit fatigued. And then by about halfway, people are starting to make attacks or moves or try to shorten the group. Whereas now it's very interesting that the mountain bikers come in. Now, what makes a mountain biker physiologically different from a road racer is that they have a huge ability to create lactate and then sit at that lactate and then come back to a sustainable power. Where was it hard for a lot of the road riders to come into the fold was all of a sudden they had to be good off the gun for the first hour and then come down to a more sustainable power. So guys like Keegan, he was very good at adapting to the new style of racing because he has the mountain bike pedigree. Other riders had to kind of evolve into that or adapt their training. So now what we actually see at the start of a gravel race is essentially a 1 hour maximum time trial, but it's not sustained whatsoever. It's like this. It's like, so how do you train for that? It's a very good question. And then what do you have to be good at afterwards? You then have to be good at holding a sustained power for a very long period of time. So you can see the challenge, right? It's the actual key performance indicators have changed. And you see riders like Ivar Slick, who used to be super dominant in the races, whereas he's like a turbo diesel. He would be able to stay with everybody at the start of the race, and then he would start turning on his engine about halfway through and then just rev and rev and rev and break the chain and then be able to win the race. There's a guy like Ivar, I'm sure he's going to keep working on it, but he hasn't quite made that shift yet to be able to stay with that lead group.
Into this, you need also to integrate for sure the nutrition and maybe some strength work for absorbing the shocks and be able to climb with this power and all the skills that you need to have on the gravel, and especially to avoid the crashes, avoid puncture too, because it's technical skill also. Do you train athletes or do you recommend athletes on how to do this?
Yeah, so I'll start with skills. I would say skills is the most forgotten part of cycling. And it's, in my opinion, it's the most important. If you have the ability to close a gap on a downhill after you've been maybe dropped a little bit on the climb, you don't stress on the climb. You take it at your pace and you don't burn, basically you don't burn your matches and then you come back on. Or you have the ability to actually put others under pressure on a downhill. Or you actually get to relax a little bit more through a single track where everyone's pushing, you're actually recovering. That said as well, there's a lot of crashes in gravel that I see road riders having that haven't really evolved or practiced or even thought about the specific skills for gravel. It's like a point and shoot. They use power to get themselves back, but that's power that you could be using for the later part of the race. So for me, I never skip skills day. It's something I always say is that recovery days should actually be a day that you go and play on the bike. You test your limits. You do simple braking drills. And you really bring it back to the basics so that you feel really comfortable with the physics of the bike and how you actually integrate on the bike. Instead of being a passenger, which a lot of road riders are, you need to be a pilot of the bike. And this is where you see the mountain bikers having a big advantage over the road riders. When it comes to nutrition, it's a very complicated subject. And I think, we're in a culture at the moment where it's all about carbs, 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 carbs. For, at a 20,000 foot view, this is fantastic because people are no longer under fueling. But I would actually say that a lot of riders are over fueling. And they're probably thinking that, these algorithms that everybody has is, a one size fits all. And that if I can do 120 grams an hour, 140 is better. But we also have to think about, what our total expenditure is. If you're someone like a pure time trialist who weighs 80 kilos and you're averaging 440 watts for an hour, you have to think about how many kJs that is, right? But if you're a rider that's actually averaging 220 kJs an hour, your burn rate doesn't necessarily need jet fuel. It might need something a little bit different, something that's a little bit slower. And, one of the things that I go through with my athletes is you do push the upper limit to see what they're comfortable at holding, because if you can hold more, that's great. But a lot of people get stuck on thinking that more is, like if some is good, more is better. And I've actually got some athletes that are actually optimized at 80 grams per hour, because we have to remember we also still have a lot of glycogen stored in our muscles. We also have a lot of liver stored glycogen. So it's not like we're actually starting on empty and that we're just having to put it in. And it's not that the only carbohydrate or energy source in our body is carbohydrate, because in these long races, we also have to have an optimized fat max, which is a whole different system. And then riders are still using ketones at the same time as carbohydrate. And this is also a very, delicate and counterbalancing form of substrate. So nutrition is something that I believe can only be done either with a coach that knows a lot about this or working specifically with the nutritionist, because one size does not fit all. And we have to remember that as different as we look on the outside, we're even more different on our insides, biological and a cellular difference. So, and then it also comes down to, everyone thinks about this, 1 to 0.8 fructose to glucose ratio. And it's like, sure, that's going to work for a lot of people, but it might not work for you. So it's about experimenting, but also having someone who's educated enough to see what the differences are and to also have the fortitude to actually say, I think we should try less, because all athletes are addicted to always doing more recovery methodologies, more training, more efforts, more carbohydrate. But what if the opposite was true and actually less was better? It's easier, right? You have to do less things. Your body has to process less. it has to fix less damage. It can actually go into parasympathetic as opposed to sympathetic response. So one of the reasons why I think a lot of athletes can get caught in traps of always wanting to do more is that they actually don't trust themselves and they don't believe in themselves enough. They're not good enough. And if you're not good enough, you need more. So you're always looking for more as opposed to actually using subtractive theory as opposed to additive theory. You're actually trying to refine what is the minimum effective dose that I need of nutrition? What is the minimum effective dose I need of efforts, of VO2 max, of skills, and maximizing things that you can do off the bike, like sleeping or having fun with friends, and remembering that life is so much more than just using yin. You also have to have yang, right? Everything has to be in right relationship. And if we have too much fire, we will burn out. So the same goes with nutrition.
Team EF coaching, you work with high-level amateurs for sure, but with pro as well. And with the explosion of the level in gravel, who is coming to you for advice today? Are there privateers coming to you to trying to close the gap with the top guys on the start line? Or are you coaching also a lot of amateurs who want to challenge themselves with longer races on the gravel side?
So Team EF coaching, we have 14 coaches and they're sort of all around the world in different places and they have different specialties. And we have Olympians from track cycling that work with track cyclists. We have Chad Hager, who is a time trial specialist, but also a gravel specialist. So, if you're interested in time trialing, you work with Chad. You can also work with Chad for gravel. We also have Ian Boswell, winner of Unbound, that you can work with. And, he brings over that experience, from his form of racing in gravel, which, he's won Unbound. So there's a lot of pedigree there. But when it comes to, who we work with, it's everybody. It's people that just want to improve their health. That's a really big focus. There's some people that just want to learn how to ride their bike better and enjoy it. So that's one side of what we do. And then we have people that, are trying to qualify for, Grand Fondo World Championships or Masters World Championships or under 23 World Championships at an elite level. And then there's people that want to win Unbound. There's people that want to kind of, even just win at a club level. We help people at all levels, but we have the expertise to be able to train people at the highest level. We have this association with the World Tour team, which also means that you can come into our service course and do Medicart testing to actually find out your lactate substrates, thresholds, full metabolic profiling and VO2 max, which gives us a more accurate number to work with. And we also do a lot of training camps around the world that you can join us where we work on skills. And then we also work on a lot of the kind of things that I think a lot of coaches seem to forget about, which is actually recovery methodologies that require less effort. So it's how do we actually calm the system down? How do we learn to control? How do we think about tactics? But if you're asking specifically for privateers, yes, this is something that we take a lot of pride in working with, actually. The project of working towards something big is something that we all have a lot of buy-in towards. We have a lot of experience. And we also have all of the scientific side from the World Tour team that translates to our coaches. So we do a lot of coaching sessions between the World Tour team and other experts that come in to keep our coaches learning, because science is always evolving. But there's also two sides to science, right? There's what the World Tour guys can handle, and then there's a whole lot of, I would say, modalities that might not apply to somebody who also has a full-time job or a part-time job or kids or, has a mortgage to pay, which is to say that all stress summates. And the part of our brain that actually interprets what stress is doesn't interpret the difference between them. So we have like a global stress, it's like 0 to 100. And, maybe work and the demands of this is like 50. And then, you have relationship stresses, you have money stresses. And then all of a sudden we throw on too much cycling, you're over your limit, right? So your immune system suffers, your body's full of cortisol. We have minimal adaptation as opposed to maximum adaptation. So I think what we specialize in at EF coaching is finding the balance and keeping people in right relationship to their bike, so that we give cycling programs and, PT programs and nutrition programs that people can actually follow.
Okay, so you can say that for the privateer, the classic privateer, and if we take right now maybe the top 30 best gravel athletes on the start line of the biggest races, most of them are still privateers. We'll see how it will evolve in the following years, but you will say that they need to integrate their stress from managing their career, the sponsor, the logistic around the races, the marketing and so on, into the complexity of the training load, and to manage the season from 1st of January to end of December?
Absolutely. I think one of the dangers for a privateer is almost to become too alone, is to take on too many of the responsibilities. There's a lot that you can't give to somebody else, say the logistics, the travel, the managing the relationships with the sponsors. But acknowledging that these things are a stress to the system is a start. And also to have somebody to help you recognize that these things do come at a cost, but they're not a cost that actually is something that is like spent, that you can't get back that time. It's about actually recognizing the time that we have to maximize adaptations from training. And it's also to recognize that there's times that we actually might need more recovery or more easy rides or less. And this is where, this isn't necessarily a sales pitch for EF, because all good coaches around the world do this. And it's why I think that every athlete does actually need to have a coach, is because we're very myopic and we get very stuck in our own head. And we know that something that has worked in the past to get us somewhere, we always try to repeat that. And then most of the time we don't have the same outcome. Whereas actually having somebody who is the object that's watching the subject, so you have that object-subjective relationship, they can start to look at emotional cues. They can start to look at physical cues. They can start to look at different trends that an athlete can't necessarily recognize within themselves. So for me, the best coaches around the world are actually looking for everything beyond the data. Data is very important, right? And it gives us some nice clear metrics, but this is a very one-dimensional way of looking at fitness. But if we actually kind of like zoom out and we see this as a whole and we come at it with a holistic view, we can start to recognize which levers need to be pulled at the right time, and to also make training novel. Like the body is very good at making an adaptation, right? It's like, if we throw VO2 efforts where we're doing 20/40s for 8 minutes times 3, that's going to stimulate a very, very exciting change for the body if we can recover from it. But if we continue to do this, this isn't a novel stimulus. This is actually something that will actually stunt the system and actually do more muscle damage, more oxidative damage, more cortisol flow to the body without actually making changes. So a lot of athletes get stuck in this rut where they go, well, I know what works for me. It's like, well, you know what worked for you, but you're a different athlete this month than you were in April last year. And we also don't know if you had a perfect run-in or if you might have had an injury that might have actually given you some time off to recover. So it's about keeping things novel, keeping things different. But most of all, it's actually keeping things fun and making the perspective change that winning is not everything. And a lot of athletes don't like to hear that because they start thinking that it is everything. But winning is the byproduct of process. And if you focus on the process and you enjoy the process, most importantly, you have to enjoy what you're doing, your body will actually adapt more. And then also, if you understand why you are doing something different, why we are changing the efforts, why we are doing more this week, why we are doing less this week. When the athlete has more buy-in because they understand what's behind the process, they tend to achieve the process more. So if they see all of a sudden that actually we only have a 12-hour week on the calendar this week, but last week was 25, they're sitting there, they're anxious in their own head. They're starting to maybe not eat enough that week. They're starting to maybe go to the gym to do something extra, or they start to go for a run at night because they're sitting there nervous. Because a lot of athletes are type A personalities. They're not good at doing less. But if they understand why they're doing less, they will do less. And if you also prescribe a day at the beach with your friends, because this is what I call rad recovery, this is also really important. We have to have emotional regulation. We have to have more outside of cycling, because if your entire ego and your entire happiness depends on how you do on the bike, well, I got news for you. You're not going to be good on the bike for 10 months a year. It ebbs and flows no matter who you are. So if you have things outside of cycling that can sustain your happiness, your enjoyment, and also your sense of self, then when we go through a bad patch, we don't dig ourselves into a hole that's even harder to get out of. And then if we also maintain these during a good patch, it helps us keep perspective that actually the bike is not the only thing, and it's not my entire identity. I'm more than just a cyclist. I'm a person who rides bikes. So having somebody in your corner that can help you understand not only why we're training, but why we use cycling kind of as a metaphor for life, then you actually build a very well-rounded athlete that not only is going to have success this season, but every season. And then when they finish cycling, also have a fantastic relationship with the bike beyond that, which is the reason we all started, because we just love riding bikes.
Yeah, and I really like this holistic approach because I can apply it also on my side when I work with athletes on their career, on the partnership management, on the communication. Because if you go all in on the results, you put all your money on something you cannot really manage. And you can manage your fitness and how you are on the start line, but after everything can derail really fast, and other rider can be pushing more than you, can be more technically able to do things that you are not, and so you're betting on something you cannot really manage by yourself. So that's really something important, and I think we need to develop and push this in all areas of an athlete's career, on the coaching side, but also on the business side, on how they are managing their communication and so on. And sometimes they are really to focus on only the results of the last race.
Correct. And something I also see with athletes that forget to kind of like open their peripheral is they tend to do most of their training alone. And they also think that what their coaches prescribe them, they have this like glass ball that can predict the future, right? It's like if you do exactly 8 minutes rest before the next effort, you will win unbound. But it's not like this, right? Because actually, coaches, we have a lot of data that we can push into a black box, right? A lot of history with the athlete, what's worked in the past, what we think are the novel training stimuluses that we need. But then it goes into this black box and it's like invisible, and then something pops out on the other side. And that's different every single time. It's like a novelty generator. So what's a better training stimulus? An athlete that gets the recovery period right every single time, or an athlete that got to ride with their friends for the 4-hour ride, still do their 3 10-minute efforts. The first one had an 8-minute rest between them, and then the next one had a 25-minute rest between them. And they also got to ride with their friends who decided, actually, I'm going to race you up this climb. And they actually end up going harder, and they actually start breaking through a few of the glass ceilings. And they're also following the acceleration. And now they're doing a sprint towards the end. So they actually get to test a few things. What's the difference? Okay, maybe one gets a perfect stimulus, but the other one gets a close to perfect stimulus, but they enjoyed the day. And they enjoy every time they ride with their friends. So what's a challenge for a privateer and for any bike racer is the fact that the season goes from November, when they start training, to October. So like motivation, where does that come from? It comes from joy. It doesn't come from somebody just being this like alpha male, like I'm going to be the best. I'm going to just put more work in than everybody else. It's like you have to be a very special character for this to be what works for you. And those are the outliers. They exist, but they're the outliers. But there also tend to be the riders that aren't very good with media. You tend to also be the riders that aren't very fun in general, and they're kind of just like lone wolves. But if you're not exactly this archetype, and you're somebody that actually needs fun, and you need to ride with people, don't sacrifice a day riding with friends if you have the opportunity, because you have these very specific efforts. Because on any bunch ride, you can actually just go ahead and then wait, and then go ahead again and wait, and then maybe do the last hour with your friends. But it's still been a lot more fun and more social. And if someone comes along with you for those efforts, then you even get more stimulus. You get to challenge yourself, and you actually get to see how you approach things from a psychological perspective, not just an effort, because you don't win a race by all of a sudden hitting a button and then sitting at 420 for 10 minutes. And this is one of the most misunderstood things in training, is that, you know, if you look at a training file, and it's why most Zwift riders don't do well transferring across to the road, it's because they're very good at hitting a very sustained effort, right? Where there's literally no break in tension. They've just got this effort, and then maybe at the end they do a little sprint. But if you actually have a look at any race file, on any climb, it's like boom, 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 boom. So why do we always train like this? So unstructured elements of structured training also have their place. And where do you learn craft? Where do you learn racecraft? Where do you learn actually how to sprint against somebody? It's by doing it against somebody. So my philosophy as well, if any of my athletes say, there's a group ride going tomorrow, how can I fit this in? You talk your athletes through how you can actually approach a really fun ride with friends while still getting maybe 95% of the effectiveness, but you can do this more often. And you don't get a rider thinking on a bad day, oh, I'm a failure, because they still had fun with their friends. So there's always two sides to the coin, right? There's perfection, and then there is probably what we actually need. Like perfection should not be the goal in cycling, especially not in training.
And you recently mentioned that gravel is being eaten by professionalism, and it was supposed to escape this at the beginning. That's why some roadies came into the gravel to maybe escape the World Tour environment, to jump on the bus, just going down, taking the bike, going to race, and after you go back to the hotel, the physio, and so on. this routine, which could be annoying and boring at the end. But we are seeing now more of the performance side integrated, especially into the top gravel races in calendar with altitude camps, some food weighting, aero optimization on the bike also. So as the lifestyle gap between World Tour and gravel disappear or tend to disappear, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, it hasn't fully disappeared. In many respects, it's inevitable that riders take it more seriously, and I've got nothing wrong with that. I think it's great. We should all follow our dreams, and if we do want to work hard towards something, we should do that. From my perspective, I was done, right? I wasn't wanting to go back up to altitude. I used to spend 200 days minimum on the road per year. Some seasons did 96 race days, 92 race days, 88 race days. We still don't have team buses turning up in the same way. That's like the Death Star turning up. And I feel really sorry for the first teams that do that because it's really lame, you know. And at the moment, Specialized team, they've just got the best riders, right? They've got Matt Beers, they've got Keegan, they've got Maz, they've got Sophia, and they've got G. They just bought the best riders. They've invested in the riders. Sure, they do have support at the races, but they haven't done it in a way that's actually like, we are the most dominant machine ever. And actually, everyone really respects them. I think they're doing it in a really nice way because they're just saying, our priority for our company is to win. We're going to buy the best riders. Nothing wrong with that. It's actually quite cool. But when Ben Perry, who rides Guava, rides for, Castelli Sog, gets fourth, but actually was like very much almost second if he didn't crash on the last downhill in the 360, like who got equal to or even more press than Mads for Tracker 360? It was Ben. And we see Mads is winning everything at the moment, but gravel is not about just the winner. It's about all of these people that are relevant in the front. And I think if some other teams come into the fray and they don't have the Matt Beers, they don't have the Keegan, they don't have the Maz, it's going to almost be a bit lame because, they come in with all of this seriousness and then they don't win anyway because the best riders are there. And they also have numbers. So if other teams do start playing team tactics, Specialized can play them right back. To date, Specialized haven't really done that in a negative way. They've just come out and raced. And, Matt Beers was still third at 360. But I don't think he was racing it just for Mads, right? Because he was still third. He was still there to win. So I think they do things in a really nice way. Is it going to get more serious? Yeah, for sure. Do I think it's bad that riders are taking it really seriously? No, because there's actually a career pathway now that you don't have to be a road cyclist and make, a life-changing amount of money. I think it's really exciting and it's great that the sport's evolved there. But I think the bigger issue is, does the sport need to take itself a bit more seriously? Yeah. Like, is safety an issue across the board? It's easy to point out one race, but that's not the point. It's all of the races. There's some UCI races like the Gralak, which are incredible with their safety. They have first aid scattered around the course. They have vehicles to pick riders up. There's absolute road closure. There's no risk of having any kind of collision with a car because it's done fantastically. But then there's other UCI races, which are the complete opposite, and it's very dangerous. Then, there's unsanctioned races that do it very, very well. And then there's other unsanctioned races that don't. So I think what we need to see is just more focus on the safety of the races because now the front is going faster than it ever has. I wouldn't even necessarily say I blame the races at this point. It's just that they just haven't caught up to how the sport has changed and how the front group is so big now and that the speeds are so high. And then you've still got the thousands of people behind it. So it's not an easy challenge, but I think if some races can show that they can do it, then it's possible. And the last thing we ever want to see in gravel racing is that someone would die. That would be horrible. But there's been enough close calls that it could have been possible. And no one wants to be the winner of a bike event where somebody has, a life-changing or life-ending moment. It's not why we do the sport. And sure, we can crash our bike and hurt ourselves on our own accord. We understand this risk. Cycling is a dangerous sport by its very definition. Gravel is a very dangerous sport, but there's necessary risk and then there's unnecessary risk. And I think what I would prefer to see more than, worrying about what teams do at this point is that just races start taking the professional side of the sport a little bit more seriously as well.
Yeah, it has evolved so fast that we are a bit into the gray zone now, where we need more professionalism on some side, but still having pleasure and be able to be open about some other things, as you mentioned, and be really holistic about our approach of the gravel racing and also gravel training, gravel practice, and be able to just enjoy it.
Exactly.
And so now, if we talk about the future, you mentioned a few things, but we've seen now that in between the European races and the ones of the Lifetime GP, for example, or other US races, there are maybe some culture clash. The purely American vision with ultra long races, self-sufficiency, also emerging team tactics. We've seen at Sea Otter, for example, or I'm sure we will see it at Unbound too, versus the European vision driven by more the shorter, punchier, and more technical courses. In your vision, where is the sport going? Do we will see this separation going on? Or maybe the pro will go onto the lifetime and the UCI races and the Euro races will be more for amateurs or just challenges?
There's a few questions there. There's a few points, so I'll try to unpack them one by one. One of the things I find really funny is that a lot of North Americans think that European courses aren't technical. European gravel's kind of soft. And it's because of what they've seen on television for the World Championship courses. Whilst those courses looked untechnical or non-technical for better English, there were sections that they didn't see. And I've been only to maybe like 1 or 2 races in the USA, which are always the Belgian waffle rides, that have had anything even close to as technical as the parts we didn't see of the World Championships. Was it a challenge for the event organizers to televise? Yes. So they kind of have to choose courses that allow us to televise. So it's, we have one thing, which is the first time gravel has ever been televised and actually recorded and seeing how the race has gone. But the cost was with the technology that we had at the time, which is 4 years ago. We can't forget that 4 years ago in terms of technology with drones and different ways in which we can actually, send signals between vehicles, bikes, because it's very different, right? Because, it's not just that we have a camera at the front of a road race. That's actually going to one helicopter, which is then bouncing to another helicopter, which is then going down to a receiver. So televising a race is a really technical thing. So to do it for gravel, it's a huge challenge. 4 years later, we have better technology to be able to do this in live stream. So yeah, European gravel 100% is way more technical than anything I've done in the USA. There are some fun races, outliers like BWR, especially North Carolina. That's pretty extreme. Also, Belgian Waffle Ride in California. This has also got some crazy single track, which just makes the race awesome, right? It means that skills are something that you have to have now. It's not just like an optional bonus. It's something that you have to have. European gravel is way, way, way more technical. But we do tend to have like shorter races, which is also pretty cool, right? Because if we think about Unbound, for example, an amateur doing Unbound, if you look at how many hours they average in a week, most amateurs will average between 8 and 10 hours. And that's great, right? That's still a lot of work, especially if they have a full-time job, family, other responsibilities. It's actually a lot of work. And if you're riding consistently 8 to 10 hours, you can do a 100-kilometer race really fast. And you can be in insane condition for a 100-kilometer race, 120-kilometer race, 140-kilometer race. But all of a sudden, when an amateur rider that averages 8 to 10 hours in a week goes to Unbound and they finish in an 18-hour time, they're doing more than a week's training in one ride. And for some people, they're actually doing twice the amount of volume that they do in a week in one day. Like, is that healthy? I don't know. So I think there's time and a place to break the eggs, right? Like you don't have to live in the dojo all the time. And a lot of people love that challenge. So I respect it. And I think it's really cool that people do that. But it does beg the question, like for the people that actually make the event money, which is not the 50 professionals, because a lot of them don't pay, right? You get free entries. So it's actually the people who are all paying is that everybody else. Do you make a course that somebody is going to be able to have a race, still race as hard as they can, finish, and actually have enough energy to, one, not be finishing in the dark, and to be able to have a nice meal and a beer with friends and have a social time afterwards? Or are they just jumping in a car, driving like zombies to get to the airport or to get home and then work the next day? So for me, I personally really like the shorter races. We still need to have some of the outlier races like the Tracker 360, Iceland Rift, Unbound, right? These are like the ultra endurance. Like anything more than 6 hours is actually considered an ultra endurance sport. But cycling doesn't have to be ultra endurance to make it a good event. And ironically, you tend to still have the same winners for the front of the race anyway. So for me, there is a big difference between the two races. But then there's some European riders like Joe Laverick that actually doesn't like European racing. It's too technical for him. So he likes to go to the US, and that's great. Like big engines win in the USA. Well, as I said, there are still some races that are very technical. But then to answer the lifetime question, will the professionals just do lifetime? Well, lifetime is not a gravel series. It's 3 mountain bike races. And for a European to go across for the 7 races, you have to think none of them are close enough in time for you to actually stay between the races, unless you have so much money that you can handle living in the USA. Most Europeans don't want to live in the USA just for racing. Some do, but most don't. So it actually means like the prize money that you get if you won lifetime series still wouldn't pay for your total cost to travel 7 times. And then you have to have mountain bike management as well. You have to have different bikes. So for the US riders, I think lifetime's fantastic. But then there's still some riders like Ian Boswell that just don't like mountain biking. So they're only going to do the lifetime series races that they like to do, like Unbound or Big Sugar, or I know it changes every year, but lifetime is not the like professional solution to the sport because it's actually just not a gravel series.
Yeah, now with the 3 series, we have 3 main ones, and professional happen to have a career doing only European technical races or only lifetime or a mix of both.
And you see,
Also gravel, yeah, UCI, gravel Road series and so on. So that's a good era for professional gravel riders because they can choose. They
yeah,
can
and specialize.
yeah, exactly. And we are seeing more and more young European racers that don't go to the US to do lifetime Grand Prix because you have also to manage jet lag. You need to do the recon, so you need to be there in advance. So it's really challenging.
And the stress of jet lag to your system, to your immune system, is far greater than people give it credit for. Sure, you can race 5 days afterwards just as strong as you would, like, if you've adapted to the time zone. But then you also have to adapt back. And then you have to adapt back and you adapt back. And if you think about all of this time lost for training because of the adaptation, you can't train the normal way. You have to respect your system. One, you're getting less training, but also at a certain point, your body just cracks and says no more. So if you're going to do lifetime, it's very hard to do it properly. And I think we've seen a lot of Europeans attempt lifetime and about halfway through the series to start skipping races because they start to realize they can't afford it. Their money starts to run dry. And 2, they're just exhausted and they start realizing, hang on, some of the goals I have left for this season in Europe, some of the World Cups or some of the class mark races are a higher priority now. So they stay and there are some riders that choose their race programs, I think, really intelligently. And then I think there's a lot of riders that try to over race and just go everywhere all the time. I personally made the mistake in my first year. I think I did 3 trips to the USA and also raced in Australia for the first UCI race there, which I couldn't help myself. Australian rating a UCI gravel in Australia. Unfortunately, I was only second. I didn't get to win. Adam Blazovic put me to the sword that day. But I made the mistake in my first year was I was actually more exhausted from the travel than I was from the racing. And I paid the cost. Then I refined it and I started to realize which races I was better at, which races didn't suit me, which races were also just the most fun. And I think that's the other thing that, we also need to remember is that we should be choosing events that bring us joy and happiness and community. And there are races that really build community, like SBT, like Steamboat. This race is essentially a bike race that is there, but its main mechanism is actually to build community and tribe. And it feels beautiful to be there. And you're meeting lots of people, you're going on rides with school kids, you're seeing events that are trying to bring more diversity into the sport because we have to admit it's a very white male sport and it can be better and it should be better. So there's events that really celebrate that and actually try to encourage people to feel safe and unjudged and that the courses are built in a way that feels safe for them to be able to actually approach it if it's their first bike race. Like first impressions matter, right? If you turned up to a really serious bike race the first time and it was too dangerous, you're probably not going to come to the next one. So there's different events for different people and different priorities. And I think we are in a golden age. And I think we can get a little bit stuck in saying like, what is the most important gravel race of the year? I don't think it matters. I think the truth always comes out at the end. And for marketing, it's also good that we don't have like one race that rules them all, because we can kind of share that amongst brands that are also giving more money to the sport, having more people with opportunities. We have more events around the world because of it. And the more people on bikes, the happier I am.
And the last question, because I know your time is precious. What is the most common training mistake you see gravel pros making right now?
That is a very good question. I think every athlete is stuck in comparative mindset. They're always comparing themselves to what other people are doing. Like in November, if you've had your good break, which every rider should have like 3 to 4 weeks off the bike each season. My opinion, other people think differently. But if you're going to do 52 weeks of the year, if you look at it 52 weeks, if you take 4 weeks off, people go, that's crazy. But you're still on the bike for 48 weeks of the next year. So actually 4 weeks is nothing, but it's really important. But then when they get back on the bike, they start seeing riders showing that they're doing 28-hour weeks or 31-hour weeks. And they start thinking, well, I'm only doing 12. So they do more. Maybe the other athlete can handle that. I would argue that they shouldn't be doing that anyway, especially not in November. But a lot of athletes compare themselves. They spend too much time seeing what other people are doing on Instagram. A lot of athletes post their training performatively, almost to like fuck with other people, right? They're trying to get in their heads and they're digging their own hole, but they're also making sure that their competitors do the same thing. So I would say, and again, this is where a coach is a very important tool. It doesn't need to be a coach. It can be a mentor. It can be other athletes that are like-minded in knowing that you are where you are and the training that you need is not the same that someone else is doing. So staying out of comparative mindset is fundamental if you're going to be your best version of you on the bike. Stop looking at what other people are doing. Do you?
That's a really great point, and I've heard Cassiane Vadoma have been recommended to do this and cut all the Strava from her competitors, and since then she was really more happy to train and do her own thing. And yeah, it seems to be something that we all need to do, even at the amateur level, because we are looking for what pros are doing in training, and we want to compare ourselves on the segment and so on. We are in this, let's say, industry of the comparison right now in the cycling. And so that's something we should all do,
Exactly.
even at amateur level. So yeah, to hand up, where can people enter the Team EF coaching program, or maybe talk with you about coaching?
Yeah, you can find us on Instagram or LinkedIn. Also our website, teamefcoaching.com. And we also have a podcast called the Cycling Performance Podcast, which is on Apple, Spotify, and also on YouTube. So if you want to learn more about us, check it out. And we also have a click-through button for a free consult call as well, if you just want to learn more about what we do and our approach. And yeah, it's quite an honor for me to be able to share my experiences with others and to help teach and guide people through the sport at all levels. And it's the same for all of our 14 coaches that we have. They all share a very similar philosophy and love teaching. It feels like it's our mission is to help people on bikes.
Yeah, I'll put all the links in the show notes if you guys want to have a look. So thanks a lot, Nathan, for your time, and the discussion it was really great to have some overlook and your point of view on the training required for gravel racing and the differences between the road and the gravel side, and your vision into the future of gravel both in Europe and the US.
Thank you. It was a great chat and I enjoyed it a lot.
Thanks, Nathan. See you. Bye-bye. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Gravel Paddock. If you want to stay ahead of the peloton, the best thing you can do right now is hit that subscribe or follow button. If you enjoyed the deep dive, please drop a 5-star rating and leave a comment. For more inside access between episodes, follow us on Instagram at the Gravel Paddock. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode. Ride hard.